What Amish husbands do when wives refuse another child. I said no after the fifth. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the kerosene lamp breathing. My husband Aaron sat at the head of the table with his hands folded, the way he folded them before Grace. Except there was no food between us. Only a single sheet of paper with the bishop's handwriting on it. I was 34 years old. 5 children slept upstairs. My youngest, Miriam, was 9 months old, and I had not slept a full night since the spring before her. Aaron slid the paper toward me without looking up. "Read it," he said. I did not pick it up. I said, "I am not signing anything tonight. I told you in June. I am telling you again. No more." He finally looked at me then, and his face was not angry. That was the part that frightened me. It was patient, the way a man looks at a fence post he intends to replace in the morning. Outside, a buggy was already turning into our lane, and I had not invited anyone. To understand why a buggy was coming to my door at 9 o'clock at night, and why my husband had stopped arguing with me weeks earlier, I have to go back to the winter I turned 19, when my mother stitched my wedding apron and told me, without quite looking at me, that a good wife does not count. I grew up in a settlement in eastern Ohio, in a district my father always called the strict side of the ridge. Our bishop, Bishop Yoder, was a small man with a soft voice and rules that did not bend. My mother had borne 11 children. Her sister had borne 13. The women in our kitchen spoke of pregnancies the way men spoke of weather. Something that arrived. Something you endured. Something God sent and you did not question. When I married Aaron Schrock the April I turned 19, I believed I was stepping into the same life my mother had lived, and I believed I wanted it. Aaron was 23 then. Quiet, broad through the shoulders, with a slow, careful way of speaking that I mistook for gentleness for a long time. He was not cruel. I want to say that plainly, because the story is not as simple as cruelty. He brought me wildflowers the first summer. He built the cradle for our first child with his own hands, and carved a small sparrow into the headboard, because I had once mentioned, in passing, that I liked the sound they made at dawn. When our son Eli was born 10 months after our wedding, Aaron held him for an hour without speaking, and then kissed my forehead and said, "Thank you, Rebecca." I thought that was love. I think now it was something else, but I did not have the word for it yet. Eli came in 1998. Daniel came in 2000. By the time Daniel was weaning, I was pregnant with Sarah, and Sarah was a hard birth. The midwife, an older woman named Fanny Stoltzfus, stayed in our house for 3 days afterward and did not let me sit up. I remember her sitting on the edge of the bed, smoothing my hair back, and saying very quietly, "You tell Aaron 3 is plenty for now. You tell him Fanny said so." I nodded. I did not tell Aaron. I did not know how to tell Aaron anything that began with the word no. The first warning came after Sarah, though I did not recognize it as a warning at the time. I had asked Aaron, in the careful way I had learned to ask things, whether we might wait a little while before another child. He did not answer me directly. He went out to the barn. He came back 2 hours later, sat down at the table, and said, "I spoke with the bishop about your tiredness. He says rest is good. He says the Lord gives strength." That was all. But the next Sunday, Bishop Yoder stopped me on the church lawn, took both my hands in his, and said, "A fruitful woman is a blessed woman, Rebecca. Do not let the world's thinking into your house." I felt my face go hot. I had not spoken to anyone but Aaron. My private tiredness had been carried out of my own kitchen and laid at the bishop's feet before I had finished my breakfast. I want you to understand something about the way our community worked. There was no rule written anywhere that said a woman could not refuse. There was no chapter and verse a husband could point to, but there was 1,000 small things. The way the older women looked at a wife who had only 2 children after 5 years of marriage. The way the bishop's wife would bring a casserole and ask, very kindly, if everything was well between you. The way a husband's brothers would slap him on the back and ask when the next one was coming. The pressure was not a wall, it was the air. You did not notice you were breathing it until you tried to stop. Hannah came in 2004. By then I had begun to understand that something was wrong with my body that no one wanted to name. After Hannah, I bled for 9 weeks. Fanny Stoltzfus came again, and this time she did not smile. She brought me a small brown bottle of something bitter, and told me to take a spoonful every morning, and she told me, in a voice low enough that even the walls would not hear, that there were ways. There were teas. There were timings. There were things the older women had passed down for generations that the men were not told about. "We don't talk about it," she said. "But we know." I held the bottle in both hands, and I cried. And I did not know if I was crying out of relief or out of shame. I tried, for the next 2 years, to use what Fanny had taught me. Aaron noticed. He did not say anything for a long time. And then one evening in the fall of 2006, he came in from the barn earlier than usual and found me at the stove with the kettle and a small cloth bundle of dried leaves I had hidden in the flour tin. He did not raise his voice. He took the bundle out of my hand, walked to the wood stove, and dropped it onto the coals. "We do not bring witchery into this house, Rebecca," he said. "If the Lord wants to close your womb, he will close it. That is not your decision." Then he washed his hands and asked what was for supper. Miriam was conceived 3 weeks later. I almost did not survive her. I will not dwell on that part. I will only say that Fanny Stoltzfus sat by my bed for 4 days, and on the 4th morning she leaned close to my ear and said, "Rebecca, listen to me. Another one will kill you. I have seen it before. You tell him. You tell him in front of someone if you have to." I nodded against the pillow. I think a part of me had already decided. I think the part of me that had been quiet for 15 years had finally stood up inside my chest and put its hand on the door. In the spring after Miriam was born, when I could walk again, I told Aaron. I told him in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, with the children outside, in the steadiest voice I could find. I said, "Aaron, I cannot have another child. Fanny says it will kill me. I am telling you now, so there is no confusion later. I am done." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "We will pray about it," and he went out to the barn. That was June. By August, the small things had begun. Aaron stopped sleeping in our bed. He said it was because the baby cried, and he needed rest for the fields, and that was reasonable enough that I did not argue. The bishop's wife began visiting on Thursday afternoons, sitting in my kitchen, with a cup of tea, asking questions about my health, my faith, my submission. My mother-in-law, Lydia, who had never been warm to me, suddenly began coming by with pies and offers to take the older children for the afternoon. I was grateful. I was so tired I was grateful for anything. I did not see, then, that I was being measured. In September, Aaron brought home a doctor, not our usual doctor, a man I had never seen before, from a clinic 2 counties over. Aaron said he was a Mennonite doctor who understood our ways. He examined me in my own bedroom, while Aaron stood in the doorway. He asked me questions in a flat voice. He wrote things on a clipboard. When he was finished, he spoke to Aaron in the hall, and I could only hear pieces. I heard the word procedure. I heard the word consent. I heard Aaron say, very calmly, "She will agree. She is a good wife." I want to tell you that I confronted him that night. I did not. I lay in bed with Miriam against my shoulder, and I stared at the ceiling, and I tried to convince myself that I had misheard, that the word had not been what I thought it was, that Aaron would never. That is the thing about being raised the way I was raised. You spend your whole life learning not to believe what your own ears tell you. In October, my sister Anna came to visit from Indiana. She was the only person in the world I could speak to plainly, and I almost did. I had her alone in the garden, snapping beans, and I opened my mouth to tell her about the doctor. And she said, before I could speak, "Rebecca, ma'am told me to talk to you. She says you are being stubborn. She says Aaron is a patient man, and you are testing him." I closed my mouth. I snapped a bean in half. I understood, in that moment, that my own mother had been written to, and that the letter had not been written by me. That was the first real betrayal, and it was not the deepest. It was only the one that taught me there would be no help from the women who had raised me. They had survived their own marriages by not asking, and they would not let me ask either, because my asking would force them to remember what they had not been allowed to refuse. Through October and into November, I began to notice a pattern. Aaron went into town every Tuesday. He had never gone into town on Tuesdays before. He came home with no packages and no explanation. One Tuesday I asked him, lightly, what business he had, and he said, "Church business." 2 Tuesdays later, the bishop himself came to our door, sat at our table, drank coffee, and and left a folded sheet of paper under his saucer. After he was gone, I read it. It was a letter of counsel, addressed to Aaron, advising him that a husband bears responsibility for the spiritual order of his household, and the order of the womb is part of the order of the house. There was a paragraph about a wife's refusal being a sin requiring correction. There was a paragraph I read 3 times because I could not make my eyes hold still on the words. It described, in careful Pennsylvania Dutch phrasing, the steps a husband might take: counsel, then withdrawal of privileges, then quiet arrangement with a doctor, sympathetic to our values, then, if necessary, a meeting of the brethren to restore the wife to her proper place. I folded the letter. I put it under the loose floorboard beneath our bed, the one Aaron did not know was loose, the one where Fanny had once told me to hide anything I did not want a husband to find. I did not sleep that night. I lay awake thinking about the word procedure, and the word consent, and the doctor's flat voice, and the way Aaron had said she will agree. The next morning I walked the 2 miles to Fanny Stoltzfus's house. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and said, "Come in, child, sit down, tell me." I told her everything. She listened without speaking, her hands working a piece of mending the whole time. And when I was finished, she set the mending down and said, "Rebecca, I have buried 4 women in this district who would not agree. 2 of them were called accidents. 1 was called a fall. 1 was called the will of God. I am old, and I am telling you what I know." She reached across the table and took my hand. "You have a sister in Indiana. You have 5 children. You have 1 chance to leave before the meeting they are planning. After the meeting, you will not have a chance." I asked her when the meeting was. She said the 2nd Saturday in December. I had 3 weeks. I went home. I made supper. I put the children to bed. I sat at the table across from Aaron, and I tried to see him the way I had seen him the morning he brought me wildflowers. And I could not. I could only see the man in the hallway saying she will agree. I think a marriage can die in a single sentence. I think mine had died in a hallway in September, and I had only just realized. For 3 weeks I made a plan. I will not give you every detail, because some of the people who helped me are still alive, and some of them still live in that district. I will say that I wrote 2 letters, one to my sister Anna, in Indiana, in plain language, telling her everything, and one to a cousin in Lancaster, who had left the Amish 12 years before, and whom my mother had instructed us never to speak of. I will say that Fanny Stoltzfus knew a woman in town, English, who drove a van and did not ask questions. I will say that I sewed money into the hem of Miriam's traveling dress, because no one searches a baby. I will say that I told no one, not even my older children, what was coming, because a child cannot keep a secret she does not know. And I will say that 2 nights before the 2nd Saturday in December, Aaron came into the kitchen with the bishop's paper in his hand, and slid it across the table and said, "Read it." That brings me back to where I began. The lamp, the folded hands, the buggy in the lane. I did not read the paper. I stood up. I said, "Aaron, I am going upstairs to check on Miriam. When I come back down, we will talk." He nodded. He was so certain of me. He had been certain of me for 15 years, and I had given him no reason to doubt. Upstairs, I did not go to Miriam's room. I went to the back stairs, the narrow ones that led down to the washhouse. Fanny was waiting in the washhouse with all 5 of my children already bundled in their coats. She had come in through the back lane, while the buggy was pulling up to the front. The Englishwoman's van was idling at the end of the pasture road, with its lights off. We carried the children across the frozen field. Miriam did not cry. To this day I believe she knew. We drove through the night. By morning we were across the state line. By the following week we were in a small town in northern Indiana, in a house that belonged to a woman I had never met, who took one look at the 5 of us in her doorway and said, "Come in, sit down, you are safe now." That is what Amish husbands did. In the community where I grew up, when a wife refused another child, they did not shout, they did not strike, they wrote letters, they held meetings, they brought quiet doctors into bedrooms, they arranged procedures that a wife was expected to agree to, because the alternative was a kind of shunning that would take her children from her and leave her with nothing. I am not saying every Amish husband. I am not saying every district. I am saying mine. I am saying Aaron's. I am saying the bishop's letter is still under a floorboard in a house I will never see again, unless one day one of my grandchildren finds it and asks me what it means. The cost was not small. My mother did not speak to me for 11 years. My sister Anna eventually wrote, but the letters were thin and careful, and never asked how I was. Two of my children, the older boys, struggled for a long time with what I had done. Eli did not forgive me until he was 26 and had a wife of his own and understood, finally, what a wife can be asked to give. Aaron remarried within the year. He had 4 more children with his second wife. I heard, through a cousin, that the second wife died in childbirth in 2014. I lit no candle. I said no prayer. I only sat on my porch in Indiana and watched my Miriam, then 7 years old, chase a sparrow across the grass, and I thought of the small carved bird on a cradle in a house I had left behind. I am 61 years old now. I have 11 grandchildren. I work 3 days a week at a fabric store run by a Mennonite woman who asks no questions about my past. I still wear a head covering, though a different kind. I still pray, though to a God I have had to learn again from the beginning, without anyone else's hand on my shoulder, telling me what he wants from my body. People ask me sometimes, the few people who know the whole story, whether I forgive Aaron. I tell them the truth. I tell them I understand him. I understand he was raised the way I was raised, that he believed what he had been taught, that the bishop's letter was, in his mind, an act of love. Understanding is not forgiveness. I have not given him that. I am not sure I owe it to him. I am sure I do not owe it to anyone else. The last thing I will say is this. When I left, I took the bishop's folded letter with me. I have kept it for 27 years, in a tin box on the top shelf of my closet, behind a stack of quilts I will never finish. I do not read it. I do not need to. I keep it for the same reason a woman keeps the receipt for a debt she has already paid. Not because she might be asked for it again, but because she wants to remember, on the nights when she doubts herself, that the price was real, and that she was the one who paid it, and that the saying of one small word, in a quiet kitchen, with a lamp breathing between her and the man she had married, was the most expensive and the most necessary thing she ever did. I said no after the 5th, and the buggy in the lane went home empty.